Hey, everybody. I know we got some folks joining in. Welcome. A few more people coming in as well. So this is a little bit of a different kind of session. I know historically we've done more, I guess, what you call webinars, where there's content, curated content. This is more of a discussion. And as we approach this to say, what are your challenges? What are the opportunities to discuss, maybe share with each other, some of the opportunities. Because ultimately, I'll just kind of kick us off with the context. Many of you have already heard this, but I feel very strongly that customer experience is on the rocks because, not only do you have the challenges with customer expectations are growing like crazy, you've still got layoffs going on, you've got companies that are, reducing headcount, but also reducing spend, or they're trying to figure stuff out because things are changing so fast. So we know we've got, in many cases, we've got some really advanced challenges out there, problems that that people need advice on. And so a big part of the intent here is to create dialogue, allow for some creative solutioning, hopefully, and then maybe even some opportunities to make an impact and make a change. So based on that, I'd actually love for you guys to while you're joining, and maybe there'll be a few more people join, but maybe put into the chat topics that are top of mind right now. I know, for instance, when I work with a lot of companies, a big set of dialogue is, I've been told I need to do something with AI, but I don't know where to go or where to solve. I know that's, obviously a big challenge. Other things that are out there are, how do we do more with less? Again, that ties in a little bit to AI as well. So anyway, I'm hoping to hear, so as you go into this, drop some topics. They don't have to be full on questions, but drop some topics. I'll ask all of you to do this into the chat, and then maybe we'll pick one and start there and then continue down the dialogue. So based on that, I'm still waiting for some things to pop through and so forth. So when we think, though, about where we're wanting to take this collective, our focus is on access, and we're trying to find ways. And this is a little bit for the folks who are even on the watching the recording. We want to provide access because, there's a lot of different communities out there, whether it's a Slack channel that they do things, whether it's, driving, to fundamentals of CX. What I'd say, I know CXPA, for instance, is very focused on, almost the basics. We want to be more, advanced dialogue for advanced professionals with advanced challenges. And so that's a big part. So, hi, Angie. How you doing, Angie? Do you want to read your kind of read through your note there, or?
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure we all agree with this. This is always something that is front of mind for us. But how are we consistently, because unfortunately it's not a one and done, how are we tying back everything we're doing, everything that we have our fingers in, back to the business outcomes, so then we can prove success across the board, especially when you have multiple leaders, depending on the fabric of your organization, how how they operate, building those relationships and then consistently showing impact.
Is that coming out of a specific question, or is it just in a general sense?
I think general, but yes, I do have specific things that are happening personally, whereby launching projects and initiatives. And now I'm in the space where, okay, what is the data saying? And how do I, show the impact and then use that, leverage that for more, to gain more in the future, to ask for more, whether it's growing my team, getting more things available to me, more resources, right?
So I will say that definitely, I think a challenge for a lot of folks is, and we've had a couple of sessions on ROI, right? What's the return on investment? How do you actually measure the success? Where, how do we make sure the executives understand both the value and so forth? So, I'll open it up. Who wants to kind of jump in on that topic?
I'm happy to get us going. and forgive me for answering your question with a question, but I would love to know, Angie, is your question more around, how do you link like specific initiatives where you're working with stakeholders more to outcome, or like more generally, like, voice of the customer results to outcomes? Because often there are outcome measures that tie to specific initiatives that stakeholders have, where it's a collaboration in the organization to drive outcomes, and people may have shared goals, right? And so then getting clarity on the goals and how the specific initiatives on the CX roadmap support them is one path. Another more general path is to evolve your system of metrics, where, a survey is just one type of metric, and there are other operational metrics that you can link together with experience data to drive business outcomes. So was your question more about measurement in general, or specific initiatives on the roadmap where you want to build a business case and demonstrate value?
It's actually both, because my approach has been, multi-pronged approach and not focusing on one thing. Because I think, part of my approach is understanding what's most important. And it seems, as I'm building relationship with all the different leaders, like they all seem to care about different things or different things are top of mind, and it keeps evolving. So I try to find patterns and say, okay, this is what it seems like people are most caring about. How do I attach myself and my team to impact this area and tie it back to, right? So it feels sometimes like I'm just, trying to grasp at straws, and find patterns because of all the different leaders and their own,
Yeah.
challenges. But the good news is that I have been doing very well at building the relationships,
Yeah, if you kind of like, I find that, different organizations are at different points, Angie, but like if you got to that like desired result, which is like the leadership team at the organization at the highest level, like the C level, are bought in, right? And they're governing the overall roadmap of CX initiatives, and you're helping them shape that roadmap. Whether it's an executive, ELT, SLT, whatever it's called, some leadership team would have aligned on a set of metrics that they consider more important. And ideally, it's explicit that CX links to those metrics, right? Rather than just having to cherry pick the specific one that one-off individual stakeholders care about to engage with them, where they're having explicit discussion, like, this is our system of metrics that we care about, whether they're growth or cost or other value metrics, and how CX links to them. Barring that, you have to go to individual stakeholders and engage them around what they care about, and try to ladder up to get the whole leadership team engaged.
Right.
Right. And if anyone else wants to add to that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So as the leader of a CX program at both Yahoo and Sage software, small business accounting software, we did quarterly planning and annual planning, right? And so we laid out a strategic plan for the year. And in that planning process, it would probably start probably 6 weeks before the end of the fiscal year. And then we'd work together at a leadership team level, and then we'd lay out the plans, right? Here's the key objectives we're going to hit. Here's the key metrics we're going to be chasing. Here's the growth, the margin, all those types of things. Once that plan was established, I would then go to all of my peers, my counterparts, the different business leaders. I'd go to the head of marketing, head of sales, head of product, head of support and service, and I would generate shared KPIs. So I understand your goal in sales is to grow by this much. I'm going to take on some of that burden. And here's the types of tactics that I will do with my CX team to help grease the skids, if you will, and help you realize that sales goal, or help you realize that savings goal, or that margin goal. And then I would do quarterly check-ins with those counterparts and kind of show, here's an operating review. Here's the initiatives we launched. Here's what they're producing. Here's what the metrics are telling us. Are you still on track, as these are your key fiscal goals for this year? and we'd retool, recalibrate, and reorient. But setting up that kind of relationship right up front, telling them, I'm in your corner, I'm in your champion, I'm going to help you hit these goals with my resources, my insights, my techniques, methodologies, and capabilities. It kind of set the year off correctly. So I wasn't always chasing them with, here's metrics you ought to care about, and did you know? And I also protect myself from them constantly pivoting, saying, I want this, no, I want to go this way. It's like, look, we're all committed to a set of goals as a company that we owe to the C-suite and we owe to the board of directors. You know, let's build a plan from day one and kind of engage in that kind of thing. But the thing I was always sensitive to is I would tool what I can deliver to fit the way they understand success. So if they care about, we had an emerging product that was coming out and we cared that that product grows exponentially, then I'm going to really be focused on brand new user experience, onboarding, and how can we generate the highest potential number of referrals so that you can sell more of that particular thing, right? So I'd be focused on what they care about, how they get their success measured, and then how can I adapt CX to service that. Does that make sense, Angie?
It makes a lot of sense. I love how you're proactively setting expectations, proactively formalizing dynamics, like setting the KPIs piece is big. And I'm seeing how I can action that now because we're in the process of doing budget planning for the next fiscal year. And part of that was conversations about how we can, work together. So I can see how I can go back and create more structure and expectations and set that stage for the future. So that I love what you said about protecting from any changes, because I think that's the culture right now.
I mean, lack of a plan means it can be anything at any time, and that
Right.
could drive us all mad. So
Yeah.
I find there's often like a distinction in the company between a program and a project. So a program is a broader view of like what are all the initiatives we're doing, what's the roadmap, how does it all hang together? And if you have a program, there's usually, like Brad and I have been saying, a set of metrics that people are aligned on where the program overall is going to help move the metrics forward. So you're thinking of the business case across multiple initiatives that are coherent, where you're getting alignment around the program and all the stakeholders are on board for that. A project level is a single initiative. And if you do one project at a time, it's hard to sustain the engagement of the leadership team. But sometimes, because they don't have buy-in to the broader roadmap, right? Where's this all going?
Right.
And how is this hitting my metrics? And sometimes you got to start with a single project. But if you don't have that kind of broader alignment around this is how we're trying to create value, this is the roadmap, this is how it links to our other metrics, it's hard to sustain momentum.
Right.
But like, that the challenge also is if you have a single project, people view it as like there's a steering team and we're driving this project and then it's going to be done.
Right.
But the reality is a program mentality is more evergreen.
Right.
And you want them to think of it at that level versus one project that's 8 weeks or three months or however many months, and then you're done.
I think that's very helpful, especially since where I was struggling is that I would think in my mind that I would set goals, or I had a goal and I have a great communication structure where I have key people that I update monthly on certain metrics and stuff like that. But then when things would come up, that front of mind, I always feel as if I'm tone deaf. Like I'm not relevant to what's important right now. So I'm sending them in and I'm not really making that impact.
yeah.
Right. And then am I being annoying?
Well, and what I like, kind of what Matt, you were saying is think about a good TV show. Maybe not a sitcom, but like a good drama or a good hour-long weekly TV show. The best ones they provide this connection at two levels. There's the storyline for the week, which, you know, gets you from start to finish, which is like a project, right? That's like, okay, we're doing this, but they also weave in a season long storyline, right? The arc of that story being, it's gonna, you know, from, you know, all of 2025 season is going to be about this other thing, and even better ones tie that to a multi-season, right, you know, program. And so you're one of the challenges I've seen a lot of, you know, CX professionals, and I did it plenty myself in the beginning, was I was focused on the season, or sorry, the episode, the project, the work, and I wasn't having enough dialogue about the season or the multi-season, you know, series, if you will, conversation. And that's where the value really is about bridging that, because that experience is so important. I think, Skip, you brought up, because I think you were saying in the chat here, a little bit similar to what Angie is about, you know, about this, but how to make CX a business critical system, not just a report. You want to add a little flavor to that?
Sure. So sometimes we get tied up in data. Sometimes we get tied up in identifying the pain, and we get tied up in the emotions that we're seeing of the customer. And we forget to tie it back to the business objectives. So what I would say is, if you want to make an impact, if you want to be seen as CX as an imperative and not just a nice to have, firmly understand the leadership's objectives, business objectives, and
Yep.
then tie that back to CX initiatives that may not be technology. It might be people. I just got done visiting a call center in Wisconsin. They brag about their dot matrix printer. They brag about their 20-year-old phone system. But if you call them, they pick up the phone faster than 911. Right. So they leverage people as a problem. And that makes sense for them, might make sense for you, but it makes sense for them because their customer are warehouse guys that a lot of these guys don't even have email, right? They use the fax machine to place all their orders, very old school approach. So they figure out how to serve their customer that way. But I'm working on a template that I can share with you you can use as a framework, and it'll help tie, you know, your leadership's objectives to making CX a case maker and proving the ROI and clearly defining the problem in business terms, not in, you know, maybe your team's terms, but in the business terms that it's important. And so if you're tired of, you know, being told not no by the business, or show me the ROI, or map your solution to outcomes to C-suite cares about, this template I'm working on should help you. I should have that done by the end of the week.
Thank
Stacy,
you.
I know you were trying to.
Yeah, and there's two of me, so you get two sides of me here. My technology's a little off today. I was going to say, having been in your shoes, working in all different industries, sometimes it really takes a pilot program to convince the leadership. And that's often what I had to do. I said, listen, I understand you don't want to give me this big budget and invest people and resources, but give me a chance to show you a pilot of this that we can scale, but I'll show you the value with low risk. And so I recommend that consider that too, because it worked for me and able to get them to believe and show them.
Yeah, I love that approach. I think piloting with a very succinct success criteria is a big deal. I think that's a great technique. I think the power of one story, you could find one customer story that is so egregious and it pulls at your heartstrings so strongly that just the moral amplitude of not addressing this thing makes the executive stand up and say, well, we can never allow this to happen to another customer ever. So storytelling is a big way to do it as well. And then finally, you know, there's there's always the back of the napkin, right? If you start to build a picture of what is your total lifetime value of your typical customer, and you look at 5 years out, what is the cost of churn? And if you lose a single customer, what does it cost to replace them and get them back up to the spending level they were before they left? And how does that impact you over a 5-year arc? And how many customers are you losing today, and what's your cost to acquire, and what's your cost to serve? And just making a math exercise on an Excel spreadsheet, you're suddenly going to have very big numbers. That is the potential of what we could realize if only we were to address some of these CX issues. But what that does is it starts to give you a confident argument using financial numbers that a lot of times people will get jiggity because the numbers are so big, and you can say, okay, fine, move the decimal point over 1. It's still a huge number. And that's the cost of inaction, the cost of us not doing anything, the cost of us not focusing on CX at all. Who else is worrying about this? And so, driving a sense of urgency and focus along those lines, if you have no other inroads to get people to care about this.
So that was a great first question, and thanks, Angie, for volunteering, because I think what your question highlights is, and this is in many ways, this is why customer experience is kind of in trouble right now. It's more complex than anybody believes, because it's basically a little bit of everything. It's culture, it's data, it's metrics, it's project management, it's change management. Truly thinking about creating better experiences is not easy. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face. And so great. Did you get thumbs up? You got some ideas, some things to work with? All right, cool. And so Kajiba, I want to move on to your session next, or your question specifically. So would you be willing to kind of share a little bit more about the question about training and incentives and customer obsession?
All right. Okay. Thank you. Good joining, everyone. I'm joining from Zambia. I'm new in customer service. I think I follow Stacy on LinkedIn, and just trying to make a difference in my country, where I think customer service has not been really a priority. And I'm training SMEs just to show value that if you focused on customer experience and the like, it will bring about more profitability, more loyalty, and the like. But I had a question that I was asked from an organization that is a public service, and they were saying, look, our services are more monopolistic in nature, and our employees don't really see the need of focusing on the customer, because whether we have all these systems or ensuring that the experience is good, customers will still come. So how do we just incentivize or motivate our workers to learn how to prioritize customer experience? So I think it's stemming from that question. So I thought I could take advantage and just learn from the experts. Thank you.
No,
Absolutely. Great question.
I'm thinking of a story of some work I did in the last few years with the public utility, where the utility is community owned. And they had a lot of debate about what does it mean to be customer centric. And, they cared a lot about service to the community and about being in the local community, but they didn't really think about customer centricity as the driving force behind the company. And for them, it was really a matter of connecting with their values and culture around public service. So is there I would ask the question of, is there some other cultural value that you can attach your efforts to, so you're not doing a 180-degree turn? Are there other things that people are proud about at the company that you can leverage the connection? This is what I call the CX and culture connection, right? How do you connect CX to your culture? And that allows you to build more positive momentum rather than having to start with a completely open sheet of paper. What are the things that you're building on that you can then amplify in the behaviors of the people in the organization to drive value? And your CX efforts, a lot of them are around behavior adoption, because the peaks in the journey are often how people show up in the journey, unless it's a purely digital experience, in which case you're focusing on how people collaborate to design and build that.
This connection from employee to the customer is another one of those complex challenges. And I know that a lot of consultants and people really kind of coach that EX drives CX, but I think that CX drives EX as well to a certain extent. But the connection I also think is important to make. So we'll break it into two pieces, because I think what Matt's talking about and when you ask about training and or incentives, I think that the reality is there's a point at which people are still people. And fundamentally, if you're able to talk to your employees about, well, think of yourself as a customer, would you rather be treated well or poorly? Would you rather, and most of them will, say, well, I'd rather be treated well, right? They don't want to be treated poorly. And then how does that make you feel? So there's that connection, that cultural, that get them to feel it a little bit more, even, empathy to say in their own shoes. I mean, think of your own experience as a customer. But then it gets into metrics too, or incentives and or training. And I think that training piece is, important, because again, you want to train them on the skill sets, the soft skills. What does it look like? What does it sound like, et cetera? Because I think a lot of people struggle with in the corporate sense, as an employee, to be like, well, I don't know what good is. And so that's where listening to calls, a quality program that you've got up and running, training them on what it appears to feel like and things like that. I know I've got some programs that I'm happy to share with you as well, but it's really about getting them that skill set. And from that perspective, you then end up having to measure. And that's where then becomes a lot of debate between, is it a CSAT score, customer satisfaction score? Is it effort? What is it at that point? And I think there's so many options. I'm wondering if anybody wants to jump in and kind of talk about maybe training or measurement specifically to his question to promote that or incentive.
If I could just follow with one thing and link it more explicitly to training, Sean. If companies just do training, whether it's like, to kind of build on having someone come in to talk to their organizations, like we're going to do training to shift people's mindsets, or we're going to do skill training. It's not sticky. It can drive some movement in the organization where you get people bought in initially and excited, but then they forget it in 3 months and nothing happens. So whether it's sales effectiveness training or soft skills training or any training, it doesn't have a lasting impact unless you translate that to behavior. So that what needs to happen is the training needs to get up. There is a role for training. For example, with one insurance client I'm working with right now, we identified the behaviors that we want for more consultative relationship building with their customers, kind of moving from a hard market to a soft market. So they're really focusing on the connection with people. So they're doing the training, and we've identified the behaviors to reinforce in the training, but then we're doing habit building and check-ins with the people after the training to make sure they're adopting the behaviors, and doing the listening in a way to see whether we're getting the behaviors. So we actually evolve their customer listening too, to see whether we're getting the behaviors and the emotions we want to evoke. And so that the importance is to continue to drive habit building beyond the upfront training and evolve the way people think of training to be more than just a one-off session. Otherwise, it doesn't actually move behavior.
Did you want to add something, or just curious?
Oh, I just thought that what Matt said was really powerful, that you have to tie it to the behavior and make it loop back around. And that's something that I'm really passionate about. And I've kind of like have my little talk track about that. You have to have fast feedback and learning loops, and then with insightful iteration. And it's so Matt tied all that up into a pretty little package.
You can evolve your customer listening to whether it's surveys or unstructured data. The call centers provide a great opportunity to provide coaching and feedback. But you can look at the journey and identify the right moments in the journey to listen, and then drive training and behavior adoption with a fast feedback loop to make sure you're getting the behaviors you want. And that's what drives business value.
Totally. And it looks like he's back with us.
Yeah. Hey, Kajiba, sorry, looks like maybe we lost you for a second.
Sorry, yes, I got disconnected. Yeah.
So when you talk about training or incentives for customer
Yes.
obsession, what have you done or tried or recommended?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the feedback. I missed some, but I think I got some. I think my focus has been like the other speaker mentioned that it's about behavioral change, and I think my approach has been trying to make people put themselves in the shoes of being a customer and just help finding out, when did they ever experience an excellent customer experience? How did it feel? And then trying just to remind them that, what you felt is exactly what your clients are feeling or how they are seeing. So I think my approach has been around trying to make them be or feel the way a customer would feel. So my advice then has also been that constantly training everyone and making them aware that customers have so many expectations and they are expecting all the time to be treated well. Yeah, so I think around that in that direction.
Yeah, I want to pull on the thread that because you talk about incentives, and man, that's a slippery slope, and maybe we'll get a little bit more dialogue here on it, because for instance, a lot of companies will say, all right, at least in the contact center, we're going to use how satisfied were you with this interaction, and then we're going to give bonuses based on that, or something like that. And incentives specifically, when tied to something nebulous like emotion, because you're really tying into whether it's empathy or otherwise, you're trying to say create a better experience because you want the customer to feel better about it. Well, it is such a slippery challenge, and things like surveys aren't really working anymore, to get enough volume and feedback. And you either get the extremes, loved you, hated you don't get a lot of stuff in the middle. So I'm curious, when you think about it, when this audience thinks about incentives, any thoughts on that, kind of the good and the bad with incentives around experience to drive that connection?
I have a view. Oh, this is an hour more topic, but I'll try to slim it down. So you need shared metrics, and you need a little bit of fun gamification, but it has to be very, very guarded, and it can't be gamed. The score can't be gamed. And what I mean by that is, when I was the only one with CX metrics, my team and I only had the CX scores and metrics and incentives tied to our bonuses. Nobody cared when we would approach them
Yep.
on fixing a problem. Not until everybody shared the incentive and it was tied to their bonus, the customer experience scores, did we all work together. But what also happened is a lot of internal fighting about, well, that score's not fair and blah, blah, blah. And I don't want to be dinged on my performance. So there has to be governance.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah.
Also, with incentives, you have to be very aware and intentional about the unintended consequences of your incentive. So I'll give an example. A leader at a company I worked with had a team of professional services programmers. And for the sake of simplicity, he set a target of 28 programs a month. And if the employees hit the target of 28 per month, then they got a cash bonus. If they missed the target of 28 a month for 2 consecutive months, Then they were put on a performance improvement plan, and if they didn't turn around their performance, they were shown the door, right? And the qualification for completion was you had to send your program to QA. And the first couple months, it appeared to be working great. Everybody's productivity had improved. Everybody was getting the bonus. But then a few months in, he started to notice he had a growing quality problem. And what happened was, as it came close to the end of the month, if you were short on your quota, you would send half-finished programs to QA, knowing that it would take QA at least a week to reject it and send it back to you. And then you'd get to finish it and it would count towards your quota again for the next month. So the unintended consequence of the incentive was poor quality and ultimately making that turnaround time longer because of the introduced rework cycle. So with incentives, be very, very careful about what unintended consequences are you driving when people, are either punished or rewarded in very significant ways based on a particular metric.
It's a risky slope, as you were calling it, Sean, a slippery slope, particularly given the survey fatigue and challenges to surveys to base CX program success on driving adoption of incentives linked to something measured to surveys where survey responses are falling. So you'd have to make sure that not only do you not have adverse unintended consequences, but also that you have a accurate way of measuring the performance through the survey, and that it's a sustainable approach, given the silent majority doesn't take the survey. I know companies in, financial services, travel, other industries that have been basing incentives on surveys, and the challenge is it sustainable as a metric, an accurate metric, given the response rates have halved in the last decade? So they're looking at things like, how do they leverage ratings and reviews? How do they leverage other unstructured data to create synthetic scores that create a more accurate measure? But you should first ask the question whether the incentive is a good one, rather before looking at whether to renew it through new technology and getting beyond the limits of surveys.
I think what's interesting, so we've talked a lot about, and I actually want to close the loop a little bit on what all of you guys have shed. Stacy, specifically pulling out your content about everybody's got to have a shared connection to that metric or incentive or whatever, right? That absolutely is foundational, because it's got to be, we're all in this together or it dies. And then this idea that, when it's up to the human, from a gaming standpoint, I mean, I always, in my keynotes, or some of my keynotes, I tell the story about the Jeep dealership after an oil change basically bribing me, saying, I'll give you a free tank of gas and I'll cover your next oil change if you give us all tins, type of thing. That stuff, I mean, it's rampant out there. So the human component. So from that perspective, I mean, one of the most exciting things I'm seeing is the use of AI to create metrics from their observational, behavioral, and analytics they can do at scale across all the touch points. This, because I know, for instance, there's vendors and partners out there that they can hook into your systems and basically evaluate all of the interactions and identify which ones are positive and negative and why, right? And they can actually determine, hey, here's what we think the loyalty score would be, or here's what we think the effort score would be collectively. And it really is driving a new type of conversation, because it's, hey, we all now are connected to an experience that we all are creating across every single touch point, versus the silent or only those that take a survey, blah, blah, blah. I'm wondering thoughts about that from this group. Maybe, I don't know, Chris, I know you specialize in AI. You want to talk a little bit about that?
And you just touched on this whole idea and use of sentiment analysis, where you can use AI to actually nothing is objective. You still have to train the AI and say, given these interactions, these times the customer was unhappy, these times the customer was, you have to tell it what to do, right? But it does at least take the subjectivity after you've done that. And then you can start measuring that. Hey, how many of these calls are the people really happy? Are they using the right, are they using the right terminology and tones? And you can train them toward getting better sentiment analysis. I think that's one of the best uses of AI I've seen in this space, to actually have the tool listen in, because one person's, I think the customer was happy, is the other person's, I think the customer sounded totally checked out. Whose words?
You can use, whether it's Qualtrics, Medallia, other platforms today in the call center to mine the call. You really don't need to have a survey after the call if you have the call. You can mine the call and synthetically score what the survey would have given you. The challenge is when you extend it beyond the call center, about whether the volume and fidelity of the signal is sufficient outside the call center to do this. And so you can start looking at, do I want to take recordings of my phone calls and video meetings of everybody and mine it? Because you can do the same thing. If we want to create this feedback loop we were talking about earlier, that Kate and I were talking about like frequent feedback around behavior training. There's a lot of things now that almost like people are working so remotely, you can actually record those meetings. The question is, do you want to? Because it'll be creepy if you start recording every meeting, everyone. People are used to it in the call center, but do you want to mine people's emails and phone calls and video meetings for the purposes of creating feedback? It's considered okay for people to have their bot to summarize the meeting, but do you want to listen to all conversations for the purpose of AI-driven feedback? You can do it. Do you want it?
Hey, Brad. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, Matt. I'm trying to keep things moving. But as we think about it, Brad, you kind of jumped in with something that is interesting, because I think you're even tying it back to what Angie was asking about. Because again, you're looking at these contacts or these experiences, and your note here about measuring outcomes, not activities. So yeah, go a little deeper on that.
I grew up managing customer support call centers for Oracle, Symantec, VeriSign, OpenWave, and a couple other smaller places. And the thing about call centers is you hire people who love to solve problems, right? It's in their DNA. They can't help themselves. So you give a team of problem solvers a metric to hit, and they're going to find a way to hit that metric, whether or not it generates the kind of outcomes you want or not. So building a well-balanced, not cheatable, outcome-based metric is a big deal. And so it is, mean time to repair plus first touch, close, resolve plus CSAT. Those three things together equals an envelope that you're shooting for, and that's where you want your outcomes. And then you also have to be gracious, right? I need this to happen 75% of the time. And I know you're going to get that one outlier call that's going to keep you on the phone forever, and that's okay, right? But like this idea that I'm only going to measure hold time, nothing else, or I'm only going to measure CSAT and nothing else, that's dangerous, right? But the other thing I wanted to interject here is, once you're a successful CX practitioner and your entire company now cares about customer experience, one of the most dangerous phenomenons that I've encountered multiple times is well-intentioned, self-empowered people scare the bejesus out of me. Because if everybody's trying to build the perfect customer experience based on their own internal understanding of what that is, it's chaos and it destroys your margins. So if you don't have a branded North Star, if you don't know what your intended experience is, and it's never been defined, and that's not based into your training, and it's not calibrated on what you call green, yellow, or red, that's a bit of a fail. And if you have these branded promises as anchor points, as you lay out what your journey should be, as you lay out what your service blueprint should be, that's important. When I was at Yahoo, we wanted things to be safe, fun, and simple. 3 things. And so we could look at any experience and we could say, did that feel safe? Was it fun? Was it simple? That was something I could teach, I could train, I could calibrate against. And it normalized tens of thousands of employees' point of view as to what great looks like to something that we can have a debate about. And I could also anchor those to our strategic intentions. So define what you want the feelings to be, define what you want the memory to be in the hearts and minds of your customers. And then, by the way, your employees ought to be feeling that same kind of memory, or else they can't generate it in their customers. But have a point of view, figure out what your branded promises are, and make that your anchor point for every future conversation. I think that's something everybody ought to focus on.
Yeah, Brad, I think that's such a good point. And I know that, so I've seen the same thing, right? You know, companies, they're we're customer centric. That means everybody's going to do what's right. And inevitably, yeah, it's the Wild West and et cetera. And this is where I talk about, you know, I think it kind of goes back to where we opened. Why are we in a little bit of chaos and trouble right now? I think is exact reason. You know, a lot of executives are saying, well, I have to reduce costs for my company, so I'm going to lay off people. That happened in my last corporate gig. They laid off half the CX team because they needed to save money, and they said, well, everybody will do their own CX. And you know, there's this quote, you know, when everyone's responsible, really no one's responsible. And right. And that's that, you know, and we're all seeing that. And this is why when the noun of CX, the metric, the department, the role is being downsized, but the experience of the customer, the verb, is so much more important. You know, how are we handling that? And that's very real, because, you know, it's probably the biggest conundrum we've got, is that at a time when CX is more important than ever, the CX profession is being, you know, shut down. I mean, at a lot of companies, it's amazing, you know, or it's just a horribly bad timing from that perspective. So yeah, I mean, thoughts on that, from maybe, because we're getting up a little bit on close here, but thoughts about that, and how to navigate that, you know, challenge in organizations, knowing it's a reality.
I mean, I think, like you said before, it tied back to my initial question or statement about always being at the forefront in terms of building relationship and consistently proving value. Like, it has to be part of like your day-to-day. So the goal I'm looking at, because right now I'm in a cost center, is to become a profit center, because we are considered overhead. Most of our business is charged back to clients, but my team and I are overhead. So that puts us at risk. So I always have that on the top of my mind, that I need to, establish strong relationships. So at a bare minimum, they like the team as people, as individuals. And then always showing, like, embedding ourselves into the fabric of the organization, building cross-functional teams. But then also being proactive about showing value, whether it's data and storytelling, as Brad was saying, tying it back to business outcomes and having that as an ongoing thing. What I really enjoyed, you said, Sean, I know we're coming at time, is the approach of looking at an episode versus like the entire season, right? Because it doesn't have to be one or the other. How are you finding that sweet spot where you're looking at the big picture? What is the season versus like when things come up or thrown at you, what's top of mind, that you're able to include that as well, and keeping that balance?
Absolutely. Chris.
I want to make just one point that is probably obvious for everyone, but everything we just talked about are all really robust, good ideas that, if objectively reviewed, would probably help. Never ignore the politics of all of this.
Yeah.
The most important thing anyone can do is get a top leader to love you and love what you're doing and think what you're doing is making them look better. And anything other than that, that's how you get laid off. And someone says, oh, well, I had this matrix and this plan and this program and all that bullshit nobody cared about because you didn't get a C-level person who really valued what you were doing. So I would say it's 20, 30%, all the stuff we just talked about, and 70% find a C-level person who simply says, oh my God, is that stuff important? Angie, don't let Angie go, because what Angie's talking about is fantastic. That's an experience I wish I had known when I was 30.
Yeah.
Chris, on the politics side, I tell people there's 3 bank accounts that you have to worry about, right? How much money do you have in these bank accounts and how big of a bet can you afford to make? The first thing is, how well is CX understood and known across your company? Is it a respected thing? Does everybody get it? Is it a new thing? Is it only a thing that this one team wants and nobody else wants? So how well is CX respected? That's bank account number 1. Bank account number 2 is your executive sponsor, who you work for in that chain of command all the way up to the C-suite. How much respect does that person have? And if you say I'm part of their initiative, how much cachet does that afford you? And then finally, your personal bank account. Do people respond to your emails? Do they like to play with you? Are you a fun personality, right? Like, how well do you get along with people? So the combination of those 3 bank accounts tell you, you know what, I'm comfortable to ask for a $75,000 funding to do this special initiative because I know I've got the cachet to do it. Or, you know what, I'm only going to try to move the needle this much and build up equity into those bank accounts before I'm ready for the big move. So being smart and tactical about, do I have the political cachet to do this now or not? And to your point, Chris, if it's not servicing the executive sponsor, that's a fool's errand. It's a quick path to get booted.
Yeah, go to LinkedIn if you're not servicing the C-suite.
True.
Anyway, that was my whole.
Yeah.
That's all I got,
So
Sean.
we're basically at time, and I love how, and this is where CX gets me so excited. Whether it ends up being called something else, which I think it will. I think customer experience, as you know, the more formal definition, because one, it's misunderstood anyway, and I think we're going to end up coming out of this. We were talking a little bit more about, kind of the brand of CX as being, hit right now, and who knows what it'll be called, but the reality is, and it goes back to as well, say, wherever you are in the organization, if you have a customer focused mindset, be the leader for your organization, whether you're in the contact center, marketing, any of those other areas. And it is such an important that the conversation keeps having. So as we close out here, I just want to say, this is great conversation. This is what we want more of. We want to make sure that we're digging into your biggest challenges. We're having real conversations, hopefully giving good advice and continuing this, because again, it's not a one and done. This is the epitome of the ongoing journey for every organization and or professional business person until you retire. It's a constant evolving dialogue. And so this was a great one. I want to thank everyone for joining and pitching in and sharing this week, and look for more of these to come, because again, we're going to probably have very targeted conversations about different subjects. I think, Dave, you're working on a journey mapping roundtable, very deep into journey mapping, and many of you, Chris, with AI and so forth. So we're gonna have a lot of very targeted subject deep dives, but this once a month kind of open office hours is a great avenue, and keep an eye out for that. Our upcoming meetings, we got one on Thursday. Skip's actually talking about the 7 ways to drive great CX. You want to give Skip just a quick highlight of the session to come later this week?
Yeah, so I'll be talking about 7 different elements, including culture, including people, including processes, and maybe even a little technology. Sometimes we focus too much on the tech, but there's other elements we can look at that are some proven strategies to create some effortless experiences.
Yep. So 1 o'clock Eastern time, Thursday the 5th is that session. And then the next one on the schedule after that is Wednesday the 18th. At 11 o'clock Eastern time is our next monthly meeting. We got a special guest, Nate Brown, and we're going to be talking about kind of a little bit like this, navigating the accelerating change in CX. So join us for one of those upcoming events, and there's we've got some others right after that. So hopefully you guys had a good conversation. We look forward to seeing you on one of the next sessions. Take care, everyone.
Hey, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.